A very good evening to everyone. I'm Neha, Ambassador of Change for GETI, that is Global Education and Training Institute. The idea of the organization, which we just saw in the video that I just played. And today, we host of Teen Talks. I am very honored to have amongst us this evening Priya Mohanty, who is an author. She writes prolifically for various reputed organizations and outlets, and she is a professor at St. Xavier's Institute of Communications based in Mumbai, Maharashtra. And thank you so much for joining us today, ma'am. A very warm welcome to you.
Good evening to all. And thank you.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Please.
Can I start?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Definitely. I was waiting for you.
My topic of conversation with you today is technology and skill development. And certainly, this is an area that we need to understand better. There's a lot that can be discussed, and it won't be possible for me to cover all the points that we need to understand. But what I've done is I have picked out a few vital points. And these points actually have been picked out from my own research, which I have incorporated in my recent and fifth book, titled Structural Transformation, Understanding the New Drivers of Innovation, Institutions, and Investment. Now, why do we actually have to understand skill development better? It's a simple concept on the face of it. Skill development is that sphere that links employment, education, knowledge accumulation, R&D, science and technology to development. In the course of my research on technology and skill development, it was amazing when I looked at the youth skills gap that the world has today. I mean, when we talk about the skills gap, we think in terms of developing nations. We think in terms of nations that have less resources. But while the skills gap is particularly evident in nations that are developing, it is also present in nations that are developed. And therefore, it is very important for us to understand the criticality of skill development. Now, most of what I've been saying is in the context of the Indian economy. But a lot of these observations also apply to the global economy. So what I'm talking about is immediately pertinent to South Asia. But the general observations, as I said, also apply to the world economy. Now, before I start on, I'd like to read a few pointers. A study by Asian Development Bank speaks about, half the people who actually enter the labor force in South Asia are without the requisite skills for the job market. That's the first statistic. The second finding is that, in fact, there are a huge number of opportunities in the healthcare sector, in the education sector, in the business services sector that remain untapped. And according to the Asian Development Bank, if opportunities in the healthcare sector are tapped, if opportunities in the education sector are tapped, the increase in employment would be significant. They estimate that if opportunities in the healthcare sector are tapped, the increase in employment would be 3.5% per annum. And if opportunities in the education and business services sector are tapped, then the increase could be anywhere in the range of 1.5% to 6% per annum. According to the UNESCO report 2019, India's skills quotient is 90% and 19%, sorry. And it has a target of reaching 47% by 2030. So if you want to make the journey from 19%, which is obviously low, to 47%, in a span of less than a decade, there's a lot that we have to understand about what skill development is. Now, I request Ms. Neha to start by showing you the presentation. Neha, please.
Yes, ma'am. You have to give me just 1 second. Can you see your presentation, ma'am?
Yes, thank you.
Just 1 second. Whenever you want me to change the slide, just let me know, okay?
Yeah, we'll get to one. Now, here, as I mentioned, some of the pointers that tell us the exigency of skill development, the exigency of fulfilling the inadequacies and the gaps in the education sector. 50% of South Asian youth leave school without the necessary skills. 10,000 young Asians enter the labor market every day, and almost half are not on track insofar as 21st century jobs are concerned. Half the population in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh is below the age of 24. Now, what does this tell us? This tells us that the employment opportunities that exist may be inadequate, but even those are not tapped because of lack of training, a lack of skills formation, and a lack of the right kind of education. Slide 3, please. So we've heard the term demographic dividend. Now, we know that demographics in the global economy are changing. We know that in the rest of the world, in most countries, the population is aging. South Asia is an exception. So we have an expanding working age population. And so it's called dividend. Dividend potentially, but it's an unrealized dividend. And most critical for the realization of this dividend is skill development and employment. Slide 4, please. Now, how do we understand skill development? I mean, there are many definitions of skill development, but I think the best way we can understand it is that skill development is much more than an add-on of peripheral skills. It is a paradigm that is interlinked with employment, technology, and human development. Now, what do I mean by this? What do I mean by it's more than an add-on of peripheral skills? I think in the Indian context for a long time, even in the best schools, in top tier urban areas, top tier urban locations, skill development was viewed as something that was connected to extracurricular activities. Now, while extracurricular activities may be an aspect of skill development is much more. Skill development is about mobilization of talent, mobilization of skills in a way that enables the individual to realize his or her potential. The fact that not enough of this is being done at the school level, and when I talk of the school level, I speak of beginning from the preschool level, right up to secondary education so far. Maybe in a few instances, we see the specter of change. But even today, the curricula that is designed is not designed in a way that is sufficiently accommodative of skill development. It is not designed in a way that is sufficiently supportive of having a vibrant innovation ecosystem. It is also not designed in a way that makes a person employable. Next slide. Now, this was mentioned that the scorecard for skills in India is 19%, and the projection is to attain 47%. Do we have a roadmap? Do we have a roadmap that fleshes out how this target will be reached region-wise, sector-wise, segment-wise? I don't know of any. Next slide. Now, what are the present constraints confronting India's education sector? Now, I think all of us are quite familiar with this. Low quality of education, suboptimal vocational training, low levels of investment. The imperative of scaling up is evident. One of the points that I'd like to mention to my audience is that when we look at the low allocations of budgetary allocation, when I'm talking about allocations, I'm talking about budgetary allocations towards education. in India, it is a matter of concern. Now, I understand that there are other pressing expenditure priorities, but education has multiple ramifications across sectors. And without actually enhancing the allocations towards education at all levels, achieving a faster pace of development is really not tenable. Now, I remember that when we look at East Asia, and East Asia grew very rapidly, developed extremely rapidly in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And in fact, their economic experience was called the East Asian miracle. And I think one of the common factors across East Asian countries, and this also includes China later, is the emphasis on education, the emphasis on training. So scaling up is extremely important. In as much as it's important to increase the levels of investment, it is also important to increase the productivity of present expenditures that are deployed towards the education sector. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned, the youth skills gap that exists across the global economy is vital. Addressing it is vital for sustainable development. And it is not just a matter of, spending a certain amount of money by the government. It's about an involvement and a participation from the business community. It's about contributions from civil society. And when I say contributions, not just monetary and non-monetary. And policies by the government that are aligned specifically with this imperative. Next slide. When we talk about skills development, we have to understand while an important aspect is actually having the physical infrastructure, having the physical facilities, having the adequate number of teachers, manpower in the sector. It is also important to understand that skill development is not something that should be disconnected from the larger mainstream. What are the skills that are required for the present job market? What are the skills that are required for India to evolve its own strengths, its own core competences? What are the skills that are required for India to actually expand R&D in areas where it can have a comparative advantage? I think all this needs to be considered when we work out skill development strategies. Also, qualitatively, the kind of education that is imparted. And it all begins, since GETI is about teachers training, it begins with the right kind of training and the right kind of orientation to teachers. And I think this is extremely important because it's so important to have the right kind of teaching. And, an inadequacy of the right kind of teaching is a factor that deters the best quality of education. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, skill development paradigm needs to be evolved in each sector. What do I mean? When we look at skill development, we cannot have the same paradigm across the industrial, the agricultural, the service sector. There will, of course, be overlaps. There will, of course, be common aspects. But we need to understand that for each sector, different competences, different skills are required. India still, for instance, has about 60% of its population dependent on the primary sector, that's agriculture. But insofar as its education is concerned, does it reflect a diversification of education that would enable the kind of skills required by the primary sector to be evolved? I don't think so. And I think that this is an opportunity for skill development and for organizations like GETI to embark on a journey where skill development is also broadened to include developing those skills that are required by other sectors that have so far been overlooked. Now, the base for skill development begins with primary education. It's not something that, it's often that, it's only after secondary education or higher secondary education that one considers the evolution of specific skills. I think that this is an approach that has to change, because skill development is about mobilizing, understanding the kind of skills that need to be developed uh, at the from the primary education, and preferably even pre-primary education. And of course, that is the base, and the apex extends beyond the postgraduate level. So you need to build, India and other countries of South Asia need to build a skill development paradigm that has a base reaching out to the apex. You know, when we talk about innovation, when we talk about technological progress, we need to understand that technological progress is not just about having that technology which is state of the art. It is about how a country assimilates, how a country is able to use that particular set of technology to increase the pace of its innovation. And in order to do so, you need to extend the skill development paradigm to the innovation ecosystem. So this is an important aspect that we need to look at. Next slide. Now, when we talk about skill development and we talk about building the ecosystem of skill development, that in itself is a source of tremendous opportunity creation. As I mentioned earlier, the ADB study, in which I said that, when you have an expansion of the education sector, that in itself bolsters employment creation. And here again, I have spoken about the study by ADB. You need people to build the logistics. You need the teachers. You need the other professionals. You need those individuals who would deliver the right kind of, beyond the teachers, beyond the other administrators. You need the logistics. And I think building all this in a country where this is starkly inadequate is also itself a source of tremendous opportunity creation. Next slide. Now, in this slide, I've spoken about expanding non-routine occupations. Now, what do I mean by this? Today, our competitor in the job market is not only our counterpart, but it's also labor substituting technology. It is also automation. And in order to see that we minimize the chances of job displacement as a result of automation, we need to expand occupations in non-routine occupations, in non-routine segments, or we need to expand non-routine occupations. That is, those occupations which are less vulnerable to technology-induced displacement. And the opportunities for expanding non-routine occupation is significant in India, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia. Next slide. Now, in this context, what do we do? How do we take advantage of the scope for expanding non-routine occupations in South Asia? And I'm emphasizing South Asia because South Asia will have the maximum increase in its working age population, led, of course, by the maximum increase in the working age population in India. Now, in my book, Structural Transformation, what I found and what I've explained is that employment in occupations that embody a higher quotient of creative intelligence, social intelligence, perception, and manipulation. Manipulation is, in this context, to be understood as a positive attribute that denotes a certain kind of intelligence. Now, employment in occupations that embody a higher quotient of all these kinds of intelligence are less susceptible to automation-induced job displacement. In order to develop these skills, you need to have curricula designed to do so. You need to have curricula that tests and develops these kinds of intelligence. The question arises, do we have those curricula? Does curricula presently enable this sufficiently? I don't think so. I think that most of the curricula, I think there is some change, but so far, most of the curricula in India tests memorizing, tests learning by rote. It does not do enough to harness creativity. It does not do enough to harness other forms of intelligence. And it is precisely what is not done enough that is required if an individual is to be able to confront competently, competitively, the challenge of automation, which is labor substituted. Next slide. And therefore, as I mentioned, it follows thus that sectors requiring a larger proportion of these skills should expand. Next slide. Now, related to the vital imperative of expanding decent jobs is also the question that arises. How many of the jobs that are presently there? So you have two aspects to this. You have the aspect of expansion, because jobs are starkly inadequate. And you have the aspect of jobs which are presently available. And it's important to understand how many jobs that are presently available are constrained because of the lack of availability of right skill set. So how many opportunities, employment opportunities are lost as a result of the lack of right skills? This is an important aspect, and I think more research should be done to delve into this aspect. Next slide. Now, I've decided to make a couple of recommendations so that those who are in our audience might find some of the suggestions useful. These are based on my empirical findings, which I've simplified. Now, the first recommendation is that when we talk of skill development activities, it is about skill development at every level, beginning with preschool and going up to the doctoral and the level beyond that. And it should be linked to the ecosystem of innovation and capability building. Now, here I'd like to speak about one aspect that I've not really written about in the presentation, which is absorptive capacity. Now, if I may read out to the audience what I mean by absorptive capacity. Now, absorptive capacity may be defined as the cumulative outcome of the level of a country's skills, competence, education, and infrastructure, and how supporting its public policies of innovation and entrepreneurship. The absorptive capacity of a nation is determined by the wider expanse of knowledge structures. Why am I talking about absorptive capacity? I'm talking about absorptive capacity because the net stock of knowledge that a country has, which flows from various sources, determines the impact of technology. It determines the pace of technological progress. And it determines the pace of innovation. And this means that skill development, which is a source of knowledge accumulation, needs to be linked, as I mentioned, to the ecosystem of innovation and capability building. What are the skills that should be evolved? What are the imperatives insofar as innovation is concerned? What are the core competences and the opportunities that are present and are not being tapped? And when I speak about the ecosystem of innovation and capability building, I'm talking about across sectors, across the primary, across the secondary, across the tertiary, across agriculture, industry, and services. So, like I said, when we speak about skill development, so far, the approach has been almost an ad hoc, disconnected approach. And so my first recommendation is that skill development at each level beginning with the preschool level, should be linked to the larger context of innovation and capability building. Second recommendation. Next slide. The other recommendation that I have is mapping competences, actual and potential, across regions, sectors, segments, with the objective of evolving an ecosystems of skills, innovation, capability building. This is related to the first recommendation. I recommend a nationwide exercise where institutions such as GETI can play a very important role in actually mapping core competences, actual and potential, mapping the advantages in terms of skills, in terms of talent, that regions, state-wise, district-wise, have, building upon those competences. This is necessary in order to understand the kind of skills that should be developed. And this will help in having that ecosystem of skills, which would tap the advantages, the inherent advantages that every region has potentially. And what are the gaps in terms of investment? What are the gaps in terms of manpower? What are the gaps in terms of expertise that each region requires to develop the skills that it is potentially endowed with? I recommend that this be done by organizations such as yours. And I think that would also enable fostering an ecosystem of skill development. And when you do so, you also understand what are the areas in which job opportunities can be tapped. What are the areas in which there is a lack of actually suitable manpower? So I think that this works both ways. It works in the direction of getting the right kind of personnel or getting the right kind of worker for your job, and also enabling an individual to be more competitive. Because when an individual is enabled to develop his or her skill or talent, automatically it follows that the individual is more competitive. So this is by no means do I say that the presentation is an exhaustive one, but I hope that it has provided the pointers in a direction that very little has been done. I congratulate GETI for taking the initiative of enabling an exchange and discussion about an area that has been overlooked. Thank you. If anyone has any kind of questions, I have ceased my lecture at this point, so that if anybody would like to ask anything, I can answer. So I would then, in that case, proceed with concluding my presentation. Like I said, this is a critical area. I believe that a lot is going to happen in this area, and certainly a more comprehensive approach to education also means that we understand skill development better, and understand the kind of initiatives that are required in order to tap the opportunities that the future would bring for us. Also, this means understanding and learning from the best practices in this area from countries that have successfully evolved effective paradigms of skill development. Thank you. Any questions?
Something happened, ma'am. I'm so sorry. Would you like to continue? Well, I'm just sharing the screen. One second.
Can you talk a little louder, Neha?
Yes, ma'am. I'm just sharing the screen once again. We were at this one. We'll continue here.
Are there any questions that any of the audience would like to ask?
Ma'am, we take questions towards the end only. We'll just finish your presentation first, and then we'll hop on to the question.
I think the last slide, I just would like to take, I waited so that if anyone would like to ask me something. So the last slide, I'm just, and you can take it as my third recommendation. I take the liberty of, that's the next slide, which is the last one. I take the liberty of actually suggesting that GETI forges a closer collaboration with the UNICEF, which still is the most important agent of expanding education across the global economy. I think that a closer collaboration with the UNICEF, the university would be, and perhaps GETI can also take the lead in spearheading a collaboration of this kind with other organizations in similar organizations in the education sector. I think that this would be a game changer. I've always felt that a closer collaboration between organizations in the same sector is concerned will be quite rewarding. Thank you.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Would you also now, like to highlight your book over here? I'll also paste, the link to the book over here in the comment section.
You would like to highlight what would you, if you can repeat that? Thank you.
Your book, ma'am. We were discussing about, presenting
Yes,
your book.
yes. I'm going to now take the opportunity of showing off my book to the audience. It's a book that has been, it's about transformation. It has been brought out by Mac in Singapore, looking at various aspects of the changes that lie ahead. An integral aspect is, about what are the kind of changes that we need to understand about innovation, technology, about the nature of investment that we have to change if the world is to move towards more sustainable direction, and about the kind of institutions that need to evolve if it is to accommodate the kind of future that we need to have if we want to survive. So that's my structural transformation, understanding the new drivers of investment, innovation, and institutions.
Great, ma'am. I have also put the link that you sent me, the Amazon link as well, over here in the chat section. Just in case anyone likes the idea, they can go and buy it on Amazon.
Any questions? Are you talking about questions?
I was just saying that I've added the link of your book
Yes, yes, absolutely.
in the
Thank you.
comment section. In the comment section. Yes, ma'am. But yes, again, before we wrap, a few questions. I'm so sorry. Why is my voice echoing at your end? If you could, I suggest something. Maybe mute yourself when I'm speaking, and then unmute yourself, when you answer. Okay. You didn't get me?
If no one has questions, then that either it means that they've not heard or they've agreed.
Great, ma'am. We do have questions, but yes, would you? My voice is echoing at your end. So would you mute yourself when I'm speaking, and then you can unmute yourself, when you answer, so that there's clarity of thought over here.
Okay, so where are the questions? I'll have to.
No. It's okay. Don't worry, ma'am. Don't worry. I'm just saying, maybe mute yourself right now.
You want me to look at? Have you emailed the questions or?
No. You won't be able to find them. I'm just saying, maybe mute yourself right now when I'm speaking, because my voice is echoing at your end for some reason.
Okay, so what do you want me to do? It's not very clear.
I'll just text you. I'll just text you.
Okay, I'm waiting.
Check WhatsApp.
Yes, okay. I'll just see. Okay.
Yep. That's perfect. So again, so as I was saying, one question that we have is how would you like to, elaborate and elucidate the importance of teacher training, since also today is World Youth Day. I mean, I just saw a notification. We're having this discussion on a very, very nice day. It's World Youth. United Nations recognizes today as a World Youth Day. So one question that we have is the importance of teacher training, basically, that you would like to highlight today, in the context of skill development. You can now unmute.
I think that's a very good question. And I did mention the importance of having well-trained teachers at some point in my presentation. I haven't elaborated on that. But I think it all begins with the teacher. And the teachers have to have the right skill sets. The teachers have to not just understand the curricula, but they have to understand how curricula can be used to harness those skill sets. They have to be dedicated. Teaching is not a job. Teaching is a service. One of the most vital services that the teacher and doctor, then they are more than working professionals. They are one is about life, one is about enabling survival, one is about enabling individuality. And I think for long, the emphasis, even teachers, I think if the emphasis has been on just enabling the student to get by the curricula, get the right kind of marks. Now that is important, but actually enabling a student to realize their personality, their talent. The most important task of a teacher, I think, just after your parent, the teacher is the most important person in your life, particularly in your formative years. And I think the most important task of a teacher is to enable an individual to understand themselves. All of us would at some point have memory of some teacher who has helped us understand our strengths, understand our weaknesses.
Yes, ma'am.
So far, if you're lucky, you get that kind of teacher, and if you're not, you don't. But I think we cannot leave it. I think that a teacher has to be trained. And one aspect of training is that you get into teaching if you want to teach. You get into teaching if you want more than just another job. I think that the approach that teaching is just viewed as a job, I think it needs to change. Because if you're not inclined to be a teacher, you may understand the curricula, but you won't be able to help the student in so many ways that the student needs to be helped to get to that, to realize his or her potential. So teachers training, the teacher needs, teachers also are victims of not having the kind of training, not having the kind of facilities, not having the kind of time for them to be able to evolve the skills that they require so that they can disseminate the right kind of training to the students. So I think that it works both ways. And yes, teachers training, investing in teachers training, expanding the amenities for teachers training is an integral aspect of skill development.
Absolutely, ma'am. And I really like the point where you highlight the intrinsic motivation of teachers. I think that's very important, for teachers to be able to imbibe various skills that they need in the future and for their students as well. Well, once again, ma'am, thank you so much for joining us. But before we conclude, today is World Youth Skills Day, as I just read, and we discussed almost, the same agenda across the board for, youth and, in general. So if you would like to conclude on that note, I think that would be a very good, conclusion for the day and for the talk as well. Unmute, unmute, unmute.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.